Hello, I'm Kim and welcome back to my studio. Today we're going to paint a calming under the sea scene together. As always, I'll walk you through the process step by step and give you all the details you need along the way. Let's get started. So we're going to start off with our background. I have some white here that I'm going to dot on the canvas. Then I'm going to swap out to some turquoise, then light blue, and finally dark blue. Now that I have all my paint out, I'm going to get a large flat brush and I'm going to start blending this out slowly, starting at the top and then working my way down to the bottom. The reason I want to start at the top is just because I want to keep the lights at the top and I don't want to lose it by blending into the darker colors and making my canvas too dark. One other note here is that I'm blending everything out in a semicircular motion rather than just straight back and forth across the canvas. I'm doing this because I want to create some sort of depth and perspective to my painting. I want to make it feel as though you're standing on the sea floor looking up towards the surface rather than just a flat, straightforward view. Once we're finished with our background, I'm going to add some really subtle rays of light coming up from the surface. I'm going to add some white to my palette, and then I'm going to get a small brush here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip into the water so my brush is already wet. And then I'm going to take just the tiniest amount of paint and start brushing it in a downwards motion. So I'm always careful to start right at the center, the top there, and then I'm brushing out in different directions to create the effect that there's rays of light penetrating through the surface of the water. So I'm just continuing to gradually build up those rays of light. Be patient with this, it can take a little bit of time. It's always better to start off lighter than you intended and build it up slowly than it is to go with too heavy of a hand and ruin your pretty background. Okay, once you're happy with your background, we're going to move on to painting the whale. So I'm getting a cool blue color here, and I'm going to take this part really slow. So I'm looking at a reference of a whale photo as I go here. You can either wait for your painting to dry and pencil this in, but I'm going to be brave and just go in right with paint. But I would avoid doing this if at all possible and use a pencil if you want to avoid disappointment. It wasn't the smartest idea to just go in with paint here, but that's what I'm doing. I'm just looking at a reference photo here. I just Googled whale silhouette and I found an image I really liked, and I'm copying it by tracing it out first in with a light hand with the paint, and then I'm going to fill it in slowly as I go. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty happy with the way this whale turned out, especially considering I skipped the step where you pencil it out first. But hopefully you did that and you're happy with your whale. So we're gonna move on to the next step here. What I've done is I've added a little bit of that turquoise color to my palette. I'm mixing it with a little bit of white, and then we're gonna add a highlight to the top of the whale. So I wanna emphasize the part of the whale where the light is coming down and hitting by just highlighting it very slowly and carefully with like a little bit of white and turquoise, and I'm just highlighting it as I go, and then I'm going to blend this all in after as well. So as mentioned, I've added the highlight, and now I'm going back in with a bit of a damp brush here, and I'm just running my brush along the line where I've added the highlight and trying to mix it in with the darker blue color of the whale as well. This is just to avoid having too harsh of a divide between the highlight and the whale itself. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the bottom part of our painting. I'm using that same cool blue color, and I'm going to paint in some seaweed that's coming up from the depths here. So I'm just starting where the darker blue color starts and then wiggling it up towards the light, or vice versa. The reason why this is those blue color as opposed to any darker color is just because I want to show that this is the farthest away from us, and so it's a little bit misty, a little bit harder to see. And as we build up our foreground here, we're going to make it darker and darker. And now I'm getting that black out, and I'm going to add a little bit on my palette right next to that cool blue color. I'm adding it right beside because we're going to be doing a lot of mixing here. So I have my medium paintbrush from earlier, and I'm just going to mix the two colors together and start outlining where I want the seafloor to be right underneath the seaweed we painted earlier. The reason I'm using the two colors is because I want the seafloor to be a little bit lighter towards the top. So where it's a little bit closer to the light, I want it to be more of that cool blue color. And towards the bottom, I want it to be more black. This doesn't have to be an exact science because it's a seafloor, it's rough, we want some variation here. But in general, we want it to be lighter towards the top and darker towards the bottom. Now that we have our base, I'm going to go back in with that small pointed brush we were using earlier, and I'm going to dip into both colors, but mostly black, to add some seaweed and coral to our sea floor here. So the reason I want to use black is just so it stands out against the background we've already done. And again, I'm just using reference photos here. I looked up seaweed and coral silhouettes to get some ideas, and I'm just adding them kind of haphazardly here and there as I think it would add interest to the painting. One little tip here as you're painting these in is to make sure that, again, as we did with the seaweed in the background, you're extending the coral and seaweed you're painting now more towards the bottom of the painting. So you don't want your painting to look really flat and 2D. You want to keep adding the seaweed over top some of the layers you've added below so that your painting kind of pops out a little bit. Once you're happy with all of your seaweed and coral on the sea floor, I'm going to move back into using this cool blue color, and I have the same pointed brush, and I'm going to start adding some little schools of fish floating around between the coral and the seaweed. I'm just lightly suggesting where they're going here by either pushing my brush in the canvas harder to make larger shapes or softer to make the shapes that look farther away. Okay, now I'm just giving my canvas a quick dry. You can either set your painting aside for a minute or you can use a hairdryer like I did here to speed things up. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to go in with a lighter orange color here, and I don't want it to blend into the darker blues and blacks I've added to the bottom of the canvas. So I've added a little bit of orange to my palette here, and I'm mixing it with a little bit of white as well. I've decided that while this painting is very beautiful the way it is also monotone. It's all different shades of blue, and I wanted to add a pop of a complementary color somewhere in the painting, and so I've decided to add some clownfish here down below. So this doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just outlining the shapes roughly of where I want the clownfish to be here in orange. And then I'm going to go in with the same brush and use a tiny bit of white and a tiny bit of black just to add those classic clownfish stripes to them as well. So if you need a reference for this as well, please feel free to use one if it's helpful for you. Alright, so we're just about finished, and this is the part where I encourage you to step back from your masterpiece, take a look at everything together, and decide if there's any final touches you want to do. I've decided I'm just going to paint over some of the blue of the whale just to make it a little bit darker here to improve its depth. And we're finished! I hope you had fun painting together, and be sure to leave me a comment to suggest what we paint next time.